In this section, we will take a look at dependent origination, or pratitya samutpada. Related to the Four Noble Truths, dependent origination is the law of causality, showing the interrelated nature of existence. This happens because that happens. Everything is dependent on what happened previously. Dependent origination is a cycle of cause and effect that keeps us in samsara, or the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Unless we can overcome our ignorance, we will continue in this cycle. The links are interrelated and dependent on each other. Starting with ignorance, we can see from the Four Noble Truths that the cause of suffering comes from our ignorance of understanding of the true nature of reality. We attach to external objects and our bodies as if they were permanent. Ignorance leads to mental formations. They are reactions formed from ignorance, such as jealousy, hatred, and greed. This leads us into wrong deeds and bad karma. Mental formations arise from our habit energy that are formed in our consciousness. We habitually protect our egos and habitually kill animals for food. It becomes part of our personality. Mental formations lead to consciousness. Our ignorance creates karmic energy. Our consciousness is tainted with this karmic energy. This comes from the alaya, or storage consciousness, which continues from life to life. Consciousness leads to name and form. This is a reference to the five skandhas. Form refers to the body, and name refers to that without form. Name and form lead to the six senses. The senses, i.e. the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, they will be the interaction with the environment or external objects. The six senses lead to contact. It is a psychological process created by the six senses, the object, and consciousness. Contact leads to feelings. There are three kinds of feeling: pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Feelings lead to craving. It is the sensuous pursuit of pleasure leading to attachment to more pleasure and the fear of losing it. Craving leads to clinging. It is attachment to things and the desire to possess them permanently. As all things are impermanent, this leads to suffering. Clinging leads to becoming. This means to give birth, create, and exist. From our attachment to things, we assume there is an existence. It is unreal due to being conditioned, impermanent, and transient. Becoming leads to birth. It implies life. It is the effect of all mental activities that make life happen. Birth leads to aging and death. Depending on aging and death, ignorance arises. Ignorance creates this cycle of samsara. Nirvana is the route out of this cycle. If we eradicate ignorance, mental formation cease. Then consciousness ceases. No need for any more from name and form and so on up to aging. Thus, no more suffering. To combat ignorance, we can use the contemplation of the five hindrances, that is, mental factors that inhibit progress. These are sensual desires through the five senses, ill will and hostility, or hatred and resentment, sloth and torpor, that is, heaviness of body and dullness of mind, restlessness and worry, which it means that we are unable to calm the mind, and doubt, or the lack of conviction or trust. Our desires distort our reality, thus increasing existence. The Eightfold Path removes these hindrances or defilements of the mind and reduces our ignorances. We can see how all these teachings are linked together. We are constantly creating strategies to increase our sensory pleasure. Our emphasis is on consumerism instead of contemplation. Our striving for pleasure creates more karma. If we meditate and create peace, this is how the consciousness will leave the body. When you abandon craving, you don't need to create strategies to get your cravings. Thus, no rebirth and no suffering. The simplest way to understand this teaching is to understand the first and the last point in the chain. Ignorance leads to suffering. If we die without removing ignorance, we will continue in the cycle of samsara and be reborn.